The night my family died, the moon was full. I used to think that was poetic. Now I know it was deliberate. Full moons are when wolves are strongest, when blood runs hottest, when an alpha can command an entire pack to act without question, without conscience, without hesitation. The Dravenmore wolves came at midnight. I was 11 years old, hidden beneath the floorboards of our cellar, pressed flat against cold dirt while the world above me ended. I heard my mother scream. Then I heard nothing. My father had pushed me down there himself. He'd said 3 words before he sealed the trapdoor above my head. Do not move. So I didn't. I lay there while the house burned, while smoke bled through the cracks in the wood above my face, while the screaming stopped, one voice at a time, until there was only silence and the distant sound of wolves howling in triumph. I lay there until morning. When I finally climbed out, everything was ash. Our home, our land, our people, 18 members of the Ashvale bloodline, gone in a single night. I was the only one left. I was 11 years old, covered in soot and someone else's dried blood, and I made myself a promise standing in those ashes. I swore I would survive. I swore I would grow up, and I swore that one day I would walk into the Dravenmore Alpha's hall, not as a victim, but as a weapon. I kept all 3 promises. My name is Sarah, and tonight, the Alpha who murdered my family is going to choose me as his Luna. I'm going to let him. Chapter 1. The Great Hall of Dravenmore keeps smelled like pine resin, candle smoke, and power. I had learned, in the 12 years since the massacre, that power has a scent. It's not blood exactly. Not fear exactly. It's something older. Something that coats the back of your throat and tells your instincts to either bow or run. I did neither. I stood in a line of 23 young women, all of us dressed in white ceremonial gowns, all of us waiting to be chosen. Some of them trembled. Some of them preened. The girl to my left was crying silently, her mascara tracing thin black rivers down her cheeks. I understood her terror. Alpha Caius Dravenmore had the kind of presence that made rooms smaller. He entered the hall without fanfare. No announcement. No drums. He simply appeared at the top of the stone staircase, and the entire room went quiet as a held breath. I had seen him before, but always at a distance. Always through the careful gauze of strategy and surveillance. I had spent 3 years inserting myself into the orbits of pack society, building the right reputation, placing myself in the right places to be noticed, to be considered, to be here. I had never been this close. He was taller than I expected. Or maybe it was the way he moved, like gravity answered to him rather than the other way around. Dark hair, close cut. A jaw like something carved from the same stone as the keep's walls. Eyes that were the particular gray of a sky right before lightning. He wore no crown, no ceremonial robes, just black, all black, because he didn't need symbols to announce what he was. His beta walked half a step behind him, scrolling something on a tablet. His gamma flanked his right. Elder Voss, ancient, dry-eyed, watching everything with the precision of a man who collected secrets, stood near the fireplace, barely visible in the shadows. Caius descended the stairs. He began to walk the line. This was the choosing. An old tradition, older than the Dravenmore bloodline, older than most pack laws. The Alpha selects his Luna from presented candidates. The bond confirms or denies. If it confirms, if the mate bond sparks, the choice is made. If it doesn't spark, the Alpha chooses anyway, based on politics, on bloodline, on strategy. I was counting on the bond not sparking. I was counting on Caius Dravenmore being the cold, calculating monster I knew him to be. I was counting on politics to work in my favor, because the identity I had built, the name I had borrowed, the bloodline I had carefully fabricated positioned me as an alliance candidate. Valuable, useful, but not someone he'd feel anything for. I needed to be chosen without being truly seen. He was 5 women away from me now. I fixed my gaze forward, regulated my breathing, kept my scent neutral, a skill I had spent years perfecting. Wolves read emotion in scent the way humans read it on faces. If I let even a thread of my true feelings rise, rage, grief, hatred, he would smell it. 4 women. 3. The girl next to me, the one who'd been crying, made a small, broken sound as he passed her. She'd been hoping he'd stop. He didn't. 2. 1. And then Alpha Caius Dravenmore stopped in front of me. The whole room felt it. That shift in atmosphere. The way a thunderstorm feels different from regular rain, charged, specific, unavoidable. His eyes moved to my face. I had prepared for this moment for 3 years. I had rehearsed my expression, practiced it in mirrors, perfected the balance of composed deference and quiet strength that I knew would appeal to an alpha's ego while threatening nothing he valued. I met his gaze, and for one catastrophic second, I forgot every single thing I had prepared, because his eyes weren't cold. That was the thing I hadn't expected, hadn't accounted for, hadn't built into any of my calculations. They weren't the eyes of the monster I'd spent 12 years hating. They were the eyes of a man carrying something very, very heavy. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Then his expression shuddered. Professional. Distant. The alpha mask snapping back into place with the practiced ease of someone who'd worn it for a long time. He looked at his beta. Her. One word. That was all it took. The room erupted. Not in cheers exactly, but in that collective exhale that means everyone had been holding their breath and now could release it. The girl to my left made a soft, wounded sound. Others shifted. Whispered. Someone near the back of the hall said a name I didn't catch, sharp with displeasure. Elder Voss, still in the shadows by the fireplace, looked at me with eyes like a winter without snow. Calculating. Suspicious. I turned back to face the front of the hall. Back straight. Chin level. I had done it. I was in. Alpha Caius Dravenmore had just handed me the knife I planned to slide between his ribs. I almost smiled. Almost. Congratulations, the beta murmured beside me, guiding me forward with a light touch on my elbow. Thank you, I said. My voice didn't shake at all. Chapter 2. They put me in the Luna's quarters that same night. The room was enormous. Stone walls softened by tapestries in deep red and black, the Dravenmore colors. A fireplace that burned without needing tending, some old pack magic woven into the hearthstones. A bed large enough to feel like an accusation. A window overlooking the eastern forest, where I knew, from my years of careful research, that the Ashvale land had once been. Where the ashes were. I stood at that window for a long time after the attendants left. This was always the plan. I had always known I might end up in this room, if things went perfectly. I had prepared for it, rehearsed it. But standing here, actually here, the enormity of it settled into my bones like cold water. I was inside the Dravenmore keep. I had spent 3 years building a false identity under the name Sarah Vane. Vane, an old Eastern Pack family, mostly dissolved, records conveniently sparse. I had studied their history, their customs, their bloodline quirks. I had made myself into a Vane so completely that sometimes, in weak moments, I forgot I had ever been anything else. Sarah Ashvale. The name lived only inside me now. In the locked room behind my ribs where I kept all the things that could get me killed. A knock at the door. I turned from the window. Come in. The door opened. Not an attendant. Alpha Caius Dravenmore stepped into my room, closed the door behind him, and leaned against the frame with his arms crossed. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just present. In that immovable way of his. My heartbeat didn't change. I had trained that too. You're not frightened, he said. Not a question. Should I be? He tilted his head, considering me. Most of the candidates were. I'm not most candidates. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement. Not quite respect. Something in between that I didn't have a name for. No, he said. You're not. He was silent for a moment, looking at me the way you look at a puzzle when you recognize the shape of it, but can't yet see how the pieces fit. I let him look. I had nothing to hide. Or rather, I had everything to hide, and I had hidden it so deeply, so thoroughly, that there was nothing left on my surface to find. The ceremony tomorrow begins at noon, he said finally. The bonding rite. Elder Voss will conduct it. There are preparations tonight that the attendants will walk you through. I understand. Sarah Vane. He said my name the way you say something unfamiliar. Testing the syllables. The Vane family. Eastern Province. Yes. Small bloodline. Not particularly political. Correct. So why did you want to be here? There it was. The first real question. I had an answer prepared. I had answers prepared for every question he might reasonably ask. I had built Sarah Vane's motivations the way an architect builds a foundation. Deep, load-bearing, invisible. Stability, I said. The eastern provinces are changing. Old alliances are dissolving. My family's bloodline doesn't have the strength to hold territory independently anymore. I let a small, rueful pause fall. I'm practical enough to know that. So this is survival. Isn't it always? He looked at me for a long moment. I respect that answer, he said. Because it's honest? Because most candidates brought me flattery tonight. You brought me strategy. He pushed off the door frame. That's more useful. He turned to leave. And I don't know what made me say it. Some instinct, some part of the plan I had built so deeply into myself that it operated without conscious thought. Alpha. He stopped. Thank you, I said, for choosing me. He looked back over his shoulder. Don't thank me yet, he said. The door closed behind him. I stood very still for 30 seconds. Then I walked to the window, pressed my forehead against the cold glass, and let 3 breaths out. Slow, controlled, deliberate. The first direct conversation. No mistakes. No slips. But something was bothering me. Something small and sharp, like a splinter beneath the skin. His eyes. Every piece of intelligence I had gathered on Alpha Caius Dravenmore over 3 years painted the same portrait. Ruthless. Cold. Efficient. A man who had expanded Dravenmore territory through force, political maneuvering, and strategic eliminations. A man who had inherited his father's methods and refined them. A man incapable of guilt. But those eyes. That weight. I pressed it down. Locked it away with everything else. It didn't matter what he felt. It didn't matter what he carried. My family were ash. And he had made them that way. Chapter 3. The bonding rite was beautiful. That was the thing I hadn't prepared for. How beautiful it was. The ceremonial chamber deep beneath the keep, carved from living rock, lit by hundreds of candles whose flames burned without wind. The smell of cedar oil and wolf sage and old magic. The kind that hums in your chest cavity, resonates in your back teeth. The gathered pack, silent and watchful, filling the stone gallery above. And Caius, standing at the altar in front of me, his gray eyes on my face. Elder Voss conducted the rite in the old tongue. Words I knew, because I had made it my business to know them. A binding of intent, not of bond. This ceremony didn't create the mate bond. That bond either existed or it didn't, written in whatever cosmic architecture governed wolves. This ceremony declared intention, declared choice. Caius's hand closed around mine when Elder Voss guided it. Warm, steady, the skin of his palm rough in a way that suggested he still trained with his pack, still did the physical work himself rather than delegating it to subordinates. I hadn't expected that either. He wasn't watching the elder. He was watching me. Do you accept this man as your alpha? Elder Voss intoned. The words meant more than they appeared. In the old tradition, accepting your alpha wasn't submission. It was acknowledgement. A declaration that you saw him clearly, all of him, and chose to stand beside him anyway. The irony sat in my chest like burning coal. I do, I said. My voice rang off the stone walls. Clear. Certain. Not a tremble in it. Caius's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Do you accept this woman as your Luna? The elder said. A beat. 1 beat longer than ceremonial. I do, Caius said. Elder Voss tied the red cord around our joined wrists. Spoke the closing words. The candles flickered. All of them simultaneously, all in the same direction, which meant the old magic had recognized the declaration. The pack above us released a low sound, collective and resonant. The sound wolves make when something important has been witnessed. Then it was done. And everything that came after. Everything started with her. The woman in red. I noticed her at the reception immediately, because she was the only person in the room who didn't look at Caius with deference. She looked at him like he was something she owned. She was stunning in the particular way that feels deliberate. Dark skin, close-cropped natural hair. A red dress that was technically appropriate for a pack reception, and somehow also a declaration of war. Her scent, when I finally moved close enough to catch it, was wolf and jasmine and something sharp underneath. Old anger, well maintained. I found Clara at my elbow within minutes of noticing her. Clara, my one true ally inside these walls. The only person in Dravenmore Keep who knew anything real about me. Not everything, but enough to be useful. She had been embedded here for 2 years, moving quietly through the ranks of the Keep's household staff. Who is she? I murmured. Lyra Keshen, Clara said under her breath. Alpha Caius's former intended. I looked at her again. Former. His father's arrangement. Before the old Alpha died, he promised Lyra's family an alliance through bonding. When Caius took the Alpha ship, he declined to honor it. She's still here. She never left. Kira's voice was carefully neutral. She holds a seat on the Pack Council. Her family controls 3 of the eastern trade corridors Dravenmore depends on. Caius can't remove her without cost. I watched Lyra. She was talking to a cluster of council members, her posture perfect, her smile bright and sharp as a blade. But her eyes kept moving. To me. Every few minutes. Quick, assessing, furious. She's going to be a problem, I said. She already is. She submitted a formal objection to the choosing results this morning. Procedural grounds. Kira paused. It'll be dismissed. But she's not done. I felt a thread of something that was almost appreciation. Lyra Keshin was playing the same game I was. Different goal. Same table. Does she have allies on the council? 3 confirmed. Elder Voss is ambiguous. Of course he was. I turned slightly, scanning the room, and found Elder Voss near the far wall, speaking to no one, watching everything. His pale eyes moved to mine the moment I found him. He didn't look away. Neither did I. After 5 seconds, he smiled. Small. Thin. Completely without warmth. Something in my gut sharpened. That man was going to be the most dangerous person in this keep. Not Caius, with his gray eyes and his strange, unexpected weight. Not Lyra, with her red dress and her old fury. Elder Voss, who had been here longer than any of them, who collected secrets the way some men collected weapons, who had looked at me in the hall last night with the eyes of someone who had already started digging. The reception continued. I smiled at the right people, said the right things. Let Caius guide me through the room with his hand at the small of my back, a touch that burned without burning, that I catalogued and filed away and refused to feel anything about. And in the back of my mind, behind every smile and every calculated word, I was counting. Every day inside these walls was a day closer. Every handshake, every ceremony, every formal dinner was a brick in the structure I was building. The Ashvale bloodline carried one power that had been kept secret for generations. A death weaving, an old magic, carried in the blood, passed through the maternal line. My mother had told me about it once, when I was very small, in the way you tell a child about something that feels mythological and untouchable. If someone destroys our bloodline entirely, she had said, her voice careful, ceremonial, the last surviving Ashvale can activate the weaving. But it requires proximity. It requires trust from the target. It requires. She had stopped. I remembered the look on her face. Something complicated. Something almost sad. It requires what? I had asked. She had looked at me for a long moment. A bond, she had said quietly. It requires a bond. I hadn't understood then. I was 11. I understood now. The death weaving could only be activated through a mate bond. A real one. Because the old magic needed a conduit. Needed the target to have opened themselves, to have allowed the Ashvale blood close enough to matter. Which meant I didn't just need to be chosen. I needed Caius to actually bond with me. To open the mate bond fully. To let me in. And then I could end everything the Dravenmores had built. I needed him to trust me. I needed him to want me. I needed him to choose me not as a political arrangement, but as his true mate. I needed to make him fall in love with me. And then I needed to use that love to destroy him. Simple. Except for the part where he wasn't what I had built him to be in my mind. Except for those eyes. Except for the way his hand felt at the small of my back. Not possessive, not controlling, but careful. Like something being protected rather than claimed. Except for all the ways Alpha Caius Dravenmore was ruining the architecture of the monster I needed him to be. The reception ended around midnight. Caius walked me to my door. We stood in the corridor outside the Luna's quarters. And the silence between us was the kind that has texture, that presses against your skin. You handled tonight well, he said. Thank you. Lyra will approach you. She won't wait long. He said it clinically. A briefing rather than a warning. Don't engage with her on emotional grounds. She's very good at it. I looked at him. What grounds should I engage her on? None, if you can help it. A pause. She's looking for leverage. Don't give her any. He turned to leave. Alpha. Same as last night. That instinct, operating without my permission. He stopped. Turned back. You said don't thank me yet last night. I said. What should I be prepared for? He looked at me for a long moment. The candlelight in the corridor made shadows of his features. Made him look older. Made that weight in his eyes heavier. This pack has enemies, he said. Old ones. You've stepped into a position that makes you visible. That visibility is a liability until it becomes a strength. And how long does that take? Depends on how quickly you become indispensable. He walked away. I stood in the corridor and watched him go, and tried very, very hard not to think about the fact that I had just been given tactical advice by the man I was planning to kill. My plan was still intact. Everything was still on course. But somewhere in the locked room behind my ribs, somewhere in the space between Sarah Ashville's grief and Sarah Vane's calculation, something was shifting. Something I didn't have a name for yet. Something I refused to examine. Not yet. Not when I was this close. I opened my door, stepped inside, and pressed my back against the closed wood. Through my window, the eastern forest was a dark mass against a darker sky. Somewhere in that forest, beneath 12 years of regrowth and silence, my family's ashes. I haven't forgotten, I whispered. The room didn't answer. But I felt it. That cold, specific resolve. Sharpening itself. Getting ready. Chapter 4. 3 days into my new life inside Dravenmore Keep, I made my first mistake. It wasn't a big one. But small mistakes in environments like this are the kind that grow. It happened in the training yard. I had gone early, before the pack's official morning session, before the sun had fully committed to rising. I needed to move. 3 days of receptions and formal introductions and careful smiling had wound something inside me tight, and if I didn't release it physically, it would find another way out. I had been a fighter since I was 13. The old she-wolf who had taken me in after the massacre, Marin, who never asked questions and always asked payment, had taught me everything. Hand-to-hand, blades, wolf instinct. How to use size against itself. How to read an opponent's body before they knew they'd telegraphed a move. I trained alone. Or I thought I was alone. I was halfway through a blade form. The 5th sequence, the one that required absolute fluidity and absolute focus. When I felt it, a presence at the edge of the yard. I finished the sequence before I turned. Caius was leaning against the stone archway, arms crossed, watching me with an expression I couldn't immediately parse. He had clearly been there for a while. His morning training clothes, dark, close-fitted, were already slightly marked with exertion. He'd been training too, somewhere else, and had found me here. The Vane bloodline doesn't have a martial tradition, he said. Not an accusation, an observation, but an observation with teeth. I ran the blade through a casual reversal and sheathed it. My mother valued practical education, I said. She hired an independent trainer. Who? Old woman. She died 4 years ago. Didn't leave a name worth recording. He pushed off the archway and walked into the yard. My body registered his approach in a way I didn't like. A heightened awareness, like every nerve near the surface of my skin had been tuned to a new frequency. I had been near powerful wolves before. It wasn't unfamiliar. This was different. This was the proto-bond. The early stirring. The mate bond recognizing proximity and pushing toward it, mindless and animal and completely indifferent to my plans. I had prepared for this too. I had protocols. I just needed to execute them. He stopped about 3 feet from me, the edge of comfortable social distance, the inner edge of something more intimate. And he was looking at me with that same puzzle-reading expression. Show me, he said. Excuse me? The 5th sequence. Show me the rest of it. I looked at him. Why? Because I've seen that form before, he said. And it's not from any Eastern Province school I know. The splinter beneath my skin drove in a fraction deeper. I kept my face composed. As I said, independent trainer. Independent trainers don't teach 5th sequence Ashvale blade work. The world contracted to a point. I heard the words. I processed them. And I did not, by the sheer force of everything I had built and trained and suffered into myself, react. I don't know that term, I said. It's an old style. Almost extinct. He was still watching me. The Ashvale pack used it. Blood memory style, they called it. Passed through families, not schools. A pause. I haven't seen it in 12 years. 12 years. Since the massacre. Since he destroyed the only people who carried that knowledge. My heartbeat was steady. My hands were still. I was Sarah Vane, and Sarah Vane had learned blade work from an old woman who died 4 years ago, and the name Ashvale meant nothing to me. I wouldn't know, I said. I only know what she taught me. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, quietly. Can I see your hands? What? Your hands. He held his own out. Palm up. An invitation, not a demand. Blood memory style leaves specific callous patterns. I want to see. And now I had 2 options. Refuse, which would look strange, evasive, and would plant a seed in the mind of a man who clearly already suspected something. Or comply, and let him look, and trust that 12 years of intensive training could mask the signature of a childhood spent learning a family form. I held out my hands. He took them. Both of them, in both of his thumbs moving over my palms with careful attention. The touch was clinical, professional, except for the part where every nerve in my body went very, very quiet, and then very, very loud. I felt it like a sound I could only hear from the inside. The bond. Recognizing. Reaching. I pressed it down so hard I felt something in my chest ache with the effort. Caius's thumb stilled. He looked up from my hands and his eyes met mine. And for the second time in 3 days, something passed between us that I hadn't built into any of my calculations. Different pattern, he said. Like I said, he held my hands for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. Then released them. Step back. 7 o'clock, he said, recovering his professional distance like a coat he'd set down. I want you at the council briefing. You should start learning the pack's operational structure. He walked away. I stood in the training yard and breathed. 4 breaths. Slow. Controlled. He hadn't recognized the form. Or he had, and he was testing me. Or he had a suspicion he couldn't confirm yet. I replayed his expression. His stillness. The moment after he'd released my hands. I couldn't tell. And I couldn't tell was the most dangerous answer I could have gotten. But the thing that worried me more, the thing that was still happening even now, beneath my ribs, low and constant, and completely against my will, was the way my hands still felt warm where he'd held them. Chapter 5. She found me in the keep's library. I had thought I was alone, which, I was learning, was a mistake I kept making inside these walls. Dravenmore Keep had a way of producing people from its corners, when you least expected them. Lyra Keshen sat in the window seat of the upper library, like she had been there for hours. Like she owned the space. Her red dress was different today. Deeper, more wine than blood. And she held a book that she was clearly not reading. She looked up when I entered. Sarah Vane, she said. Just my name. But in the tone of someone identifying a foreign object they've found in their home. Lyra Keshen, I said. I selected a text from the nearest shelf. I had actually come to find something. And moved to one of the reading tables, with every sign of complete comfort. Lyra watched me. I could feel it across the room like heat from an open window. She waited. I had learned something early in my years of preparation. When someone wants to speak, the fastest way to get their words is to not give them yours. Silence creates pressure. Pressure forces action. Lyra broke in under 3 minutes. You're not what I expected, she said. What did you expect? Something obvious. She tilted her head. Someone Caius could control without effort. Someone decorative. He usually has no patience for complication. I'm not complicated. That's exactly what a complicated person would say. She set the book down. Do you know who I am? Beyond the name. I know enough. Do you? She stood, moving toward me with the particular grace of a wolf who has never had reason to make herself smaller. I've been part of this pack for 8 years. I know where every body is buried, metaphorically and otherwise. She stopped at the other side of my table. I'm telling you this as a professional courtesy. That's generous. Don't patronize me. Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it dropped, which was worse. I'm not your enemy if you're smart about this. I looked up from my text. What does smart look like to you? Understanding your position. She leaned forward slightly. You're new. You're untested. You hold a title, but not its weight yet. The Pack Council is evaluating you. The senior wolves are waiting to see if you collapse under pressure. And you're offering to help with that evaluation. I'm offering information. She pulled out the chair across from me and sat. An intimacy I hadn't invited, which was deliberate. Caius is not what he appears. I felt a specific kind of stillness. What does he appear to be? In control, she said. Decisive. Clear in his purpose. A pause. He's drowning. Has been since he took the Alpha ship. The pack is larger than he can manage with his current structure. 3 of his 6 territorial borders are under pressure from rival alphas. His second-in-command, his beta, Ren, has ambitions. She paused, watching my face. And there's the matter of what happened 4 years ago. I kept breathing. What happened 4 years ago? Lyra looked at me. A long, assessing look. You did your research on this family before presenting for the choosing, she said. I know you did. Anyone smart would have. I did some. Then you know about the Ashevale massacre. The room was the same temperature it had been. I was the same temperature. Sarah Vane showed no recognition beyond the mildly curious attention of someone processing historical context. The pack that was destroyed, I said. 12 years ago. Yes. Caius was 17. I paused. Just slightly. A natural pause. The pause of someone recalibrating a fact. The alpha would have been his father. Yes. Lyra's eyes never left my face. Aldrich Dravenmore ordered that massacre. Caius was not alpha yet. He was a 17-year-old who watched his father burn a bloodline off the map. She let that settle. There are people in this pack who believe Caius authorized it, endorsed it. Some who believe he participated. Another pause. And then there are people who know what actually happened that night. I had stopped breathing. I started again before she could notice. What actually happened? I asked. Lyra opened her mouth. Lyra. The voice came from the library doorway. Caius. He stood in the entrance, and the expression on his face was something I hadn't seen before. Not his usual controlled distance, not the professional blankness. Something harder. Something almost cold. You're early for the council briefing, he said to me. His eyes moved to Lyra. I need a word with you. Lyra stood without hurry, smoothed her dress, looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully decode. Something layered, something that carried more than one message simultaneously. Another time, she said to me. She walked past Caius without looking at him. He stepped aside for her, his eyes staying on mine across the library. What did she tell you? He asked. She offered professional courtesy. I closed my text. Your pack dynamics. Your border pressures. She mentioned the Ashevale massacre. Something moved across his face. What about it? That you were 17 when it happened. I stood, picked up my text, kept my voice level, careful, threading the needle between innocent curiosity and calculated deflection. She seemed to be building toward something when you arrived. He crossed the library toward me. He stopped close enough that I could smell him. Pine and cold air and something underneath that was just wolf, just him, specific as a signature. The bond pressed against my ribs like something trying to breathe. I ignored it. Lyra collects leverage, he said. She builds relationships through information. Everything she gives you has a price you won't know about until she calls it in. I know. Then you should also know. He stopped. Reconsidered. I watched him choose his words with unusual care. The Ashevale massacre is not a topic you want to engage with inside these walls. It's old and it's raw and it has teeth. Why tell me that? Because someone will bring it up eventually. I want you to be prepared. I looked at him. Were you involved? I asked. I don't know why I asked. I had never planned to ask. But it came out clean and direct and entirely outside my prepared script. He met my eyes. No, he said. One word. The same weight as everything else he said. I was not involved. He held my gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Council briefing in 40 minutes, he said without turning back. Don't be late. He left. I stood in the library and felt the architecture of everything I believed shifting 2 degrees to the left. He was 17. His father had ordered it. And Lyra, who played angles and cultivated leverage and had every reason to manipulate me, had been about to tell me the truth about that night. What truth? What had actually happened? What did the people who knew know? I thought about my mother's voice. My father's 3 words. Do not move. He had known they were coming. He'd hidden me before the wolves even breached the property line. He'd had enough warning to save me, and not enough to save anyone else. Or hadn't tried. I pressed the thought down immediately. That was grief talking. Guilt dressed up as suspicion. My father had saved me. That was what mattered. I put the text back on the shelf with a steady hand. But something had broken loose in the sealed room behind my ribs. Something that had no business moving was moving. And I didn't know yet whether it was going to save me or destroy everything I had built. Chapter 6. I found it by accident. That was the thing about plans. No matter how carefully you build them, reality has the habit of handing you information you didn't ask for at exactly the wrong moment. The council briefing ran long. 2 hours instead of 40 minutes, because one of the eastern border skirmishes had escalated overnight. A Dravenmore patrol had intercepted 3 wolves from the Velen pack crossing unmarked boundary lines. And the political conversation around appropriate response was the kind that fills rooms with carefully managed aggression. I sat at the council table and watched. Learned. 6 council members. Lyra among them, precisely as Clara had said, seated at the far end with the particular stillness of someone conserving energy. Ren, the beta, to Caius's immediate right, taking notes with a focus that was almost aggressive. Elder Voss at the corner, speaking rarely, every word landing with the weight of someone who knew they would be deferred to eventually. And Caius at the head, running the room. I watched him work and revised everything again. He was good. Genuinely, technically good at the specific skill of managing competing interests under pressure. He gave each voice just enough room to feel heard before redirecting. He cut through complexity without appearing to cut at all. His spatial awareness of the room's emotional temperature was precise. He knew when to lean forward, when to sit back, when to make a joke that wasn't quite a joke, but released just enough tension to move things forward. It was not the skill set of a man who had inherited power and coasted on it. This was someone who had learned, the hard way, how to hold something large and fragile together. I hated that I could see it so clearly. After the briefing, the council dispersed. Caius was detained by Ren and 2 of the border patrol captains. I filed out with the others, exchanged a few careful words with a council member named Aldous who seemed genuinely curious about the Eastern Province trade routes I had memorized, and then I took a wrong turn, or what appeared to be a wrong turn. Dravenmore Keep had 7 underground levels. Most Luna candidates, I knew from my research, were given access to the first 4. The lower 3 were restricted. Archives, old storage, the inner sanctum where the original founding pack had made their first territorial claims. I had planned to access the archives eventually, carefully, with appropriate cover. But now, having taken my apparently wrong turn, I found myself at the top of a staircase descending into the 5th level. No guards on this particular access point. There should have been. Weren't. I stood at the top of those stairs for exactly 4 seconds. Then I went down. The 5th level was stone and silence, and the particular cold of underground spaces that never see direct light. The corridor was long and lined with heavy wooden doors, most sealed with iron locks. The air smelled of old paper and older stone and something else. Something that had no name, but felt like time. I moved quietly. The 7th door on the left was slightly open. Not enough to see through. Just a thread of warmer air bleeding out. Someone had been in this room recently. Had left without fully securing it. I pushed it open. The room was an archive. Not the official Keep archive. That was organized, cataloged, maintained. This was something older. Shelves floor to ceiling, densely packed with bound volumes and rolled documents in flat, sealed cases that held maps. The smell was extraordinary. Decades of preserved paper, dust-sealed, cold-kept. I should have left. I should have gone upstairs and forgotten I'd found this room. I should have, at minimum, taken nothing and left everything exactly as I found it. Instead, I crossed to the nearest shelf and looked. The volumes were organized by bloodline. Not by date. Not by subject. By bloodline. I ran my fingers along the spines. Dravenmore. Keshen. Velen. Thorn. Marate. Dravenmore again, an older volume. Ashvale. My hand stopped. I stood very still. There was one volume. Slim. Bound in gray. The Ashvale color. I had forgotten that the gray of dawn skies my mother had said once, because we were the people of beginnings. I took it off the shelf. I should not have taken it off the shelf. I opened it. It was not a history. It was correspondence. Letters, reproduced in neat archival script between 2 parties. The headers indicated. 1 set sent, 1 set received. The dates ran across approximately 8 months. The final date. 3 weeks before the massacre. My hands were not shaking. I told them to not shake, and they obeyed. I read the first letter. It was from my father. To Aldrich Dravenmore. Not an accusation. Not a call to war. It read like a negotiation. Careful, respectful, the language of pact diplomacy. My father offering something. Resources. Territory access. Certain information pertaining to the eastern mountain passes that Aldrich had been trying to claim through political channels for years. In exchange for, I turned to the next page. In exchange for Caius. My father had wanted to propose a betrothal. His daughter, the Ashvale heir, to the Dravenmore Alpha's son, me. He'd been trying to arrange a bonding between me and Caius. I was 11 years old. These letters were from when I was 10. I read 3 more. The negotiation evolving. Terms being discussed. Aldrich's responses. Not warm, never warm, but engaged. Interested in the trade corridor access. Less interested in the bonding, but willing to discuss it. And then a letter that wasn't from my father. From someone identified only as V. V, who wrote to Aldrich 3 weeks before the massacre with a very different proposal. V, who told Aldrich that the Ashvale bloodline carried a weapon. An old magic. A death weaving. That the last Ashvale heir, the girl child 11 years old, would become a danger to any alpha who bonded with her. That the only safe resolution was elimination. V, who recommended the massacre. V, who promised that the trade corridor access could be obtained through other means if Aldrich acted first, before any betrothal could be formalized. V, whose handwriting I had seen once before, on a small note posted inside the official keep archive. Elder Voss. I closed the volume. I stood in the underground archive and breathed. In, out, in, out. Everything I had understood about the massacre was true. Aldrich Dravenmore had ordered it. Dravenmore wolves had carried it out. My family was dead because of this bloodline. But everything else. Caius had been 17. His father had acted on someone else's counsel. My father had been trying to arrange a betrothal. To protect his family through alliance, not antagonism. And Elder Voss, who had been here for decades, who had architected the elimination of my bloodline, who had done it not out of pack loyalty, but because he knew about the death weaving, because he knew what I could do. And now he was here, inside these walls, watching me with those pale winter eyes. He knew I was Ashvale. I was almost certain of it. He had been digging since the night of the choosing. I had maybe days before he found enough to confirm it. My plan had been built around one enemy. I had arrived with a blade meant for one throat, and now the room had rearranged itself, and the throat that mattered most was not the one I had been aiming for. I replaced the volume on the shelf, precisely where I had found it. I left the archive. I climbed the stairs. I walked back to my room with a steady step and a calm face. And when I closed my door and stood in the center of the Luna's quarters with the eastern forest dark beyond my window, I let myself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. The grief. The rage. The terrible, complicated grief of being told that the monster you have been hunting has a different face than you thought. Not that he was innocent. The Dravenmore wolves had still come. Not that he owed me nothing. His bloodline's hands were still red. But that the 17-year-old who had become this man had perhaps also lost something that night. 30 seconds. Then I locked it away and started building a new plan, because Elder Voss had to be dealt with first. And to deal with Elder Voss, I was going to need Caius Dravenmore's help, whether he knew it or not. Chapter 7. I needed 3 things. Access to Voss's private records. A reason to be near him without triggering his suspicion. And time. I had none of the 3. What I had instead was Caius, which meant I needed to accelerate the bond. Not the death weaving. That required the full mate bond, fully opened, a depth of connection that took weeks at minimum. But the early bond. The recognition. The part where 2 wolves begin to move toward each other with something more than political intent. I needed Caius to start trusting me. Really trusting me. The kind of trust that made men show you things they normally kept behind locked doors. I found him that evening in the East Wing corridor, alone, returning from what I suspected was a training session he'd taken late to avoid company. His hair was slightly damp. His jacket was slung over one shoulder. He was looking at his phone with the distracted focus of someone processing information while moving. He looked up when he heard me. Luna. The title, not my name. Still. I need to speak with you, I said. Privately. Something shifted in his expression. He pocketed his phone. My study, he said. His study was exactly what I expected, and nothing like I expected simultaneously. The organized chaos of a man who thought in multiple directions at once. Papers stacked with internal logic that looked random from the outside, maps pinned to a corkboard with colored markers tracing territory lines, 3 different notebooks open on the desk at different angles, a half-empty mug of something long cold, a photo, small, framed, placed in the corner of the desk where it was visible only from his chair. I didn't look at the photo directly, noted it, filed it. He closed the door and leaned against the desk, facing me. The room was small enough that we were closer than the library, closer than the training yard. The bond didn't care about my plans. It pushed, constant and low, like a tide that couldn't read a map. What is it? He said. Elder Voss is investigating me. Caius's expression didn't change, but his stillness changed quality. The difference between a man who is calm and a man who has just become very alert is barely visible unless you know how to read it. I had spent 3 years learning how to read it. What makes you think that? He said. 3 conversations in 4 days. Casual. Apparently social. I kept my voice level. Reporting, not alarmed. But they weren't casual. He was asking about my family. My bloodline history. My mother's lineage specifically. A pause for wait. He's looking for something. What kind of something? I don't know. The most honest lie I had ever told. But I know what it feels like when someone is building a case. He's building a case. Caius was quiet for a long moment. Elder Voss investigates everyone new to the inner circle, he said. It's not personal. It's protocol. Has he investigated candidates this extensively before? Another shift. Why your mother's lineage? He said. That's what I want to know. He moved off the desk. Walked to the window. The same instinct I noticed, moving to windows when thinking. The eastern forest visible from here too, darker from this angle. The tree line a jagged cut against the night sky. Voss has certain theories, he said carefully. About bloodlines. Old magic. He's been consulting the archive records since the choosing was announced. What kind of theories? He turned from the window. How much do you know about the old death magic? He said. The bloodline abilities that predate current pack law. My heart made one hard, specific beat. Very little, I said. Some bloodlines carry latent abilities. Most of them are dormant. Some aren't. He watched my face with that puzzle-reading attention. Voss has always been concerned about what he calls contamination. Old abilities bleeding into pack hierarchy. His jaw tightened. I don't share his concern. But he has council authority to investigate potential security risks. Am I a security risk? Are you? The question landed clean and direct, the way all his important questions did. I met his eyes. No, I said. The same weight his words carried, I put into mine. He looked at me for a long moment. Something moved in his expression. Something I was getting better at reading, which was dangerous because getting better at reading him meant paying closer attention to him than my plan required. I'll speak to Voss, he said. His investigation operates within boundaries. If he's exceeded them, I want to know. I'm not asking you to fight my battles. I know you're not. He crossed to his desk, picked up one of the notebooks, set it back down. A rare, restless gesture. I'm asking you to trust that I can manage my own counsel. Can you? He looked up. I've been managing it for 5 years, he said, and there was something dry in his voice that was almost humor. Something in my chest did something I wasn't going to name. There's something else, I said. I had debated this, run it through every strategic filter I had, and decided that a partial truth, carefully placed, was more useful right now than silence. I heard something, I said, in the council briefing, between 2 of the junior members before it started, about the Velen border incident. I held his gaze. They weren't talking about a patrol crossing. They were talking about a sanctioned crossing. An arrangement. Silence. What arrangement? He said. I couldn't hear all of it, but the word I caught clearly was Ren. The quality of the silence changed again. Ren. His beta. Lyra had told me Ren had ambitions. I had not invented this. I had heard, genuinely heard, a fragment of conversation that had snagged my attention. I had chosen to bring it to Caius now because it served 2 purposes simultaneously. It built his trust, and it removed his focus from my own investigation. Using a real piece of information as a tool was not a lie. I told myself that. You're sure of what you heard, he said. I'm sure of the word. He was still. Very still. The kind of stillness that meant something was happening behind his eyes that I wasn't going to see on his face. Thank you, he said. Quiet. Direct. I nodded. Turned to leave. Sarah. I stopped. He had used my name. Not the title. My name. I turned back. He was looking at me from across the study, and the lamplight made the shadows long. And he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. He looked tired the way people look tired when they have been carrying something for a very long time with no expectation that it will ever be set down. This pack has people inside it who move against me, he said. I've known that for a long time. What I don't always have is, he stopped. Chose again. People who tell me things because they think I should know rather than because they want something in return. I stood very still. I want things, I said. I know, but not that. His eyes held mine. Not this. He was wrong. He was completely, entirely wrong. I wanted everything. I was using this information as a tool. Every word I said to him had a calculation behind it. But standing in his study with the lamplight between us, and that tired honesty in his eyes. "Good night, Alpha," I said. I left. I walked to my room, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I pressed my palms flat against my thighs, and I felt the specific vertigo of someone whose map is proving wrong in real time. He was not the monster. He was not innocent either. He was something in between that had no category in the architecture I had built. And the bond, the wretched animal ungovernable bond, was reading him not as target but as home. I was in trouble. Not the kind of trouble I had prepared for. The kind that crept in beneath all your preparations and changed the foundation while you were looking at the walls. I pressed it down. All of it. I had a new plan forming. Voss first. Everything else after. Chapter 8. The attack happened on the 7th day. Not on me, not directly. On the Eastern Trade Road, for miles outside Keep territory. 3 Dravenmore wolves, young and fast and well-trained, jumped on the return route from a routine delivery escort. They didn't survive. I heard about it through the Keep walls. The way information travels through a pack, fast and layered, each version slightly different from the last. By the time Clara appeared at my door an hour after sunrise, I had 3 versions in my head and was working on reconciling them. "Velen," Clara said. "Confirmed. The same patrol corridor as the border incident. Exact same road." Her voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. Clara didn't scare easily. "Sarah, this is escalating faster than your timeline." "I know. If the pack goes to a war footing." "I know." I was already moving, pulling on my jacket. "Voss will use the crisis as cover. Everything accelerates when people are afraid. What are you going to do?" I paused at my mirror, looked at myself. Sarah Vane looked back. Composed. Controlled. The careful construction of 3 years. Underneath her, behind the eyes, where Sarah Vane's careful blankness stopped. Sarah Ashvale. 11 years old in a burning house, pressing herself flat against cold dirt. Still alive. Still waiting. "I'm going to find out what Voss has," I said. "Today. Before he can move. That's not enough time to. It's all we have." I left her in my room and went to find Elder Voss. He was in the Great Hall, predictably. Crises always drew Voss to common spaces. He fed on collective anxiety, the way some wolves fed on raw meat, absorbing information from panicking people who said more than they meant to. He saw me coming. He always saw me coming. "Luna Sarah," he said. "Terrible morning." "Terrible," I agreed. "Can I speak with you?" "Somewhere quieter." He smiled. That thin winter smile. "Of course." He led me to a small antechamber off the main hall. A room I had already mapped, already noted, already confirmed had no secondary exits. Small enough that the intimacy would feel natural. Private enough that what I was about to do had no witnesses. The door closed. Voss folded his hands. Patient. Still. The posture of a man who believed he was always the one in control. "You know," he said conversationally, "I've been an elder in this keep for 31 years. That's a long tenure. Long enough to recognize things that others miss." His pale eyes moved over my face. Patterns. Echoes. The way certain qualities resurface across generations. "Fascinating," I said. "Your mother's bloodline," he said. "The Vane family. Eastern province. Quite sparse in the records. We were never a large family." "No." He tilted his head. "In fact, I've been having some difficulty finding any records predating the current generation. The Eastern Province archive is usually quite thorough." A pause that he clearly intended to feel like a blade. "Curious. Old families often have incomplete documentation," I said. "I'm sure you know that." "What I know," he said, and his voice dropped its conversational warmth entirely, "is that the blade form you used in the training yard on your 3rd morning here has not been practiced anywhere in this territory in 12 years. I let the pause breathe. Counted to 3. Then I said, "You were watching the training yard." "I watch everything." "Then you'll also have noticed," I said, "that Alpha Caius examined my hands afterward and confirmed the callus patterns didn't match the Ashvale style." The tiniest hesitation. He hadn't known Caius had done that. "Caius is not infallible," he said. "No, but he's thorough." I took one step toward him. Just one. "Elder Voss, I'm going to ask you something directly." And I'm going to ask you to be equally direct in return. He waited. What exactly are you hoping to find? The smile returned. Thinner now. The truth about who I've led into this keep. And if the truth is simply that I am what I say I am, then I'll be satisfied. He spread his hands. An open gesture that meant nothing. A small concern, easily resolved. Then resolve it, I said. Tell me what you need to see. What documentation, what verification. Tell me clearly and I'll provide it. I watched his calculation. He was wondering why I wasn't afraid. He was wondering why someone hiding something would invite scrutiny rather than deflect it. And he was doing exactly what I needed him to do. Doubt himself. Just for a moment. Just enough to pause, to reconsider, to hold off on whatever move he'd been building toward. I'll be in touch, he said. I look forward to it, I said. I left the antechamber and walked directly to Kira's service corridor route, where she was waiting. He doesn't have confirmation yet, I said quietly as I passed her. But he's close. I need the archive. Tonight. The 5th level. The room I found before. There's a document in that archive that connects Voss directly to the massacre authorization. If I can get it out before he removes it, you'd have leverage. I'd have his throat. I kept walking. Tonight. After the midnight bell. Sarah. Kira caught my arm. If Caius finds out you've been in the restricted archive. One problem at a time. She released me. I kept walking. The keep was running on elevated tension. I could feel it in the pack energy, that collective nervous alertness that follows violence against one of your own. Faces tighter. Conversations shorter. Wolves checking their phones and checking the doors and checking each other. I moved through all of it like water. Finding Caius in the war room. A chamber I had not yet been invited into. Standing over a map table with Wren and 2 of the patrol captains. His eyes found me through the doorway as I passed, and I gave him one small, communicating glance. Later, it meant, I have something. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Acknowledged. Good. Because I was going to need him to be in exactly the right place tonight. I had a plan. Multiple interlocking pieces, moving simultaneously. The archive. The document. Voss's connection to the massacre. And Caius. Caius, who had been 17, who had not ordered it, who had been carrying the weight of his father's sin for 12 years like a debt he couldn't repay. I was going to show him what actually happened, and then I was going to watch him choose. What he chose would determine everything. Whether my original plan remained standing. Whether the death weaving was still the ending I was working toward. Whether Sarah Ashvale got justice. Or whether the ghost of an 11-year-old girl in a burning cellar let the living have something different. I didn't know yet. I wouldn't know until I saw his face. I went to my room, and I waited for midnight. Chapter 9. The 5th level archive smelled the same at midnight as it had the first time. Time. Paper. Stone. And now, as I pushed the door open with Kira's stolen key pressing cold against my palm, fear. Mine. I didn't acknowledge it. I used it. Fear sharpens the senses if you let it operate without panic. I had learned that in my years with Marin. She used to say, panic is fear that forgot it was useful. I had never forgotten. I moved to the shelf. Found the Ashvale volume exactly where I had replaced it. Beside it, something I had missed the first time. A second volume. Thinner. Bound in black with no bloodline marking on the spine. I took both. Found a candle stub in my jacket pocket. Always prepared. Lit it with the small friction match I kept behind my watch face, another of Marin's habits, and opened the unmarked volume. It was Voss's personal correspondence archive. Someone had placed it here. Hidden in plain sight between the bloodline records, in a room that most of the keep didn't know existed. Hidden by the one man in the building who had been here long enough to know every secret shelf. He had hidden it from himself. From future inspection. The same way guilty people leave certain things where they can still reach them, but no one else would think to look. I read quickly. The massacre letter I already knew about. But the black volume held more. 3 years before the massacre. Voss in communication with the Velen pack. Not as enemies. As collaborators. Voss, feeding the Velen Alpha information about Dravenmore territorial weaknesses for 20 years. Voss, who had recommended the massacre not out of concern for the pack's safety, but because my father's proposed betrothal would have created an Ashval-Dravenmore alliance powerful enough to stop what Voss had been quietly building. An opening for Velen. A slow, patient dismantling of Dravenmore from within. The patrol killings this morning. The border skirmishes. It wasn't Ren. Or not only Ren. Voss was the conduit. Voss had been feeding Velen intelligence for 2 decades. And when my father's proposed alliance threatened to close the gap he'd been prying open, he'd had 18 people burned alive to keep his game in play. My hands were steady. My hands were always steady. But my chest felt like the cellar again. Like smoke bleeding through the floorboards. Like the moment the screaming stopped, and the silence was somehow worse. I was so deep in the documents that I didn't hear the door. Don't move. Not Voss's voice. Caius's. I didn't move. He crossed the room in 4 steps, and took in what I was doing with a single sweep of his eyes. The candle. The open volumes. The Ashvale record in my hands, my name, my real name, on the document I had been reading when he entered. His expression was, I couldn't read it. For the first time since I had met him, his face was fully open and fully unreadable simultaneously. Too many things moving at once. How did you find this room? He said. Wrong turn on my 3rd day. And you came back. Yes. Show me what you're holding. I turned the black volume toward him. Voss has been running intelligence to the Velen Pack for 20 years, I said. My voice was steady. Everything I was feeling was somewhere else, somewhere I had put it. And what was here was the operative, the planner, the woman who had been building to this moment for 12 years. He's the reason for the border pressure. The patrol attack this morning. I turned to the massacre letter. And 12 years ago, he convinced your father to destroy the Ashvale bloodline. Not out of security concerns. I put the letter on the table between us. To protect his pipeline. Because the Ashvale Alpha was trying to arrange an alliance that would have given Dravenmore enough consolidated power to close the borders Voss needed open. Caius looked at the letter. He read it. I watched his face while he read. And finally, he gave me a reaction I could read. Because it was too large to contain. His jaw tightened. Then tightened further. A muscle worked in his cheek. His hands, flat on the table over the open volume, pressed down until his knuckles went pale. Voss, he said. 1 word. All the weight of 12 years in it. He's been here the whole time, I said. In your house. At your table. I know. His voice was very quiet. The quieter he got, the more dangerous I was learning. I've suspected someone on the council for 3 years. I didn't, he stopped. I thought it was Ren. Ren may still be involved. But Voss is the source. He looked up from the document. At me. And now came the moment I had known was coming since the archive door had opened, and his voice had said don't move. How do you know what the Ashvale Alpha was trying to arrange? He said. I held his gaze. Because it's in that letter, I said. Your father's response. 3rd paragraph. His eyes went back to the document. Found the paragraph. The one where Aldrich Dravenmore wrote. The Ashvale heir has proposed a betrothal between his daughter and my son as terms of the alliance. Caius read it. I watched him process it. Watched him reach the implication. A betrothal proposal. From the Ashvale Alpha. For his daughter. His eyes came back to mine. And I saw the exact moment it connected. The blade form. The questions about my mother's lineage. The documents I had been holding when he entered, with Ashvale correspondence in my hands. Reading family records with the specific familiarity of someone for whom they were not history, but memory. Your name, he said. Very quietly. Sarah, I said. Vane, he said. A pause. Or, he said. I said nothing. The daughter, he said. The Ashvale heir. I held his gaze. And after 12 years of Sarah Vane, after 3 years of careful construction, after every prepared word and trained expression and sealed room behind my ribs. Yes, I said. Just that. The silence was absolute. Caius straightened slowly. His hands came off the table. He stepped back, not in retreat, more like a man creating space to breathe, to think, to process something seismic. His eyes never left my face. You came here to, he started. Yes. The choosing. The betrothal. The bonding rite. He was working through it. Out loud, which I hadn't expected. He thought internally, always, and the fact that he was thinking aloud meant this was larger than his usual capacity to contain. You built an entire identity. For 3 years. To get inside this keep. Yes. To get close to me. Yes. He was quiet. I waited. Why are you telling me this? He said. Right now. Why not run? Because Voss is more dangerous to both of us than we are to each other. I said. And because what I found in that archive changes the shape of what I thought I came here to do. What did you come here to do? The most important question he had asked. The only one I hadn't prepared an answer for. I looked at him across the table with his father's letters between us and my family's ashes somewhere under the eastern forest, and 12 years of grief and rage and careful, patient survival behind me. I came here to end your bloodline, I said. Every word of it true. His face didn't change. And now, he said. I felt the bond between us, not pressing this time, not pushing. Waiting, like it already knew the answer, and was giving me time to find it. Now, I said, I want to burn Voss to the ground. A beat. And then, I said, I want to know who you actually are. The silence lasted 5 full seconds. Then Alpha Caius Dravenmore looked at the documents on the table between us, and at the girl who had walked into his house as a weapon, and at 12 years of his father's crime sitting in a letter under his hands. And he said, then we need to talk. Chapter 10. We talked until the candle burned out. Then we found another. Caius sat on the archive floor with his back against the shelving and his father's letters in his hands. And I sat across from him in the same cold dark. And we said things to each other that had no precedent in any relationship either of us had ever had. Because what framework exists for this? The girl whose family your bloodline destroyed, sitting across from you with her real name finally on her face. The man you came to kill, reading the proof of his father's crime with hands that aren't entirely steady for the first time since you met him. He asked questions. I answered them. Not all. Not the death weaving. That piece I kept, not out of deception, but because it was not the right moment, and I had learned the hard way that timing is the difference between a truth that helps and a truth that destroys. He asked about the cellar, the night of the massacre. I told him. I had never told anyone. Not Kira. Not Marin. I had carried it sealed for 12 years like something radioactive. Dangerous to handle, impossible to discard. I told him about lying flat on the cold dirt. About the smoke. About my father's 3 words and the sound of my mother's voice ending. He was quiet for a long time after that. When he spoke, his voice was different. Not softer exactly. Stripped. Like something had been removed from it that had been there so long he hadn't noticed its weight until it was gone. I was in the Eastern Hunting Lodge that night, he said. My father sent me there 2 days before. I thought it was a training exercise. He paused. I came back to ash and blood, and a pack that looked at me like I'd lit the match myself. Did you know something was planned? No. Flat. Absolute. But I should have. Looking back, I should have seen it. He'd been communicating with Voss constantly those weeks. Private meetings. He stopped. He was different. I told myself it was pack business. I wasn't senior enough to know yet. You were 17. That's not an excuse. No, I agreed. It's not. But it's a fact. He looked at me. We were close enough in the candlelight that I could see the gray of his eyes without effort. Could see the exact texture of the weight he carried. Not guilt for something he'd done, I understood now, but guilt for something he'd failed to prevent. The particular torture of the witness who survived. I knew that guilt intimately. It lived in me too. The bond was very quiet right now. Not pushing. Not pulling. Just present, like a third person in the room, listening. What were you going to do? He said. Your original plan. Before tonight. I thought about lying. I thought about it seriously for about 4 seconds. The Ashvale bloodline carries a death weaving, I said. Old magic. Maternal line, passed to the last surviving heir. I watched his face. It activates through a mate bond. Fully opened. The Ashvale blood uses the bond as a conduit. It reads the bonded Alpha's pack command network, the thread that connects him to every wolf under his authority. It dissolves it. His eyes were steady on mine. Dissolves it, he said. The Alpha dies. Every wolf bonded to him is severed from central command simultaneously. The pack structure collapses. I kept my voice level. Clinical. The way you discuss surgery. Not a bloodbath. A dismantling. Your pack would survive, technically. But Dravenmore as a functioning power would end. Silence. You needed me to open the bond, he said. Yes. To fall in love with you. The word sat between us. Love. Neither of us moved. That was the plan, I said. He was quiet for so long I counted the seconds without meaning to. 14. And now, he said. Now I know that the man who ordered my family's death has been dead for 5 years, I said. And the man who inherited the consequence of that order has been living with it every day since. I looked at the Ashvale volume, still on the table above us. And the man who actually signed my family's death warrant is upstairs in this keep, sleeping in his bed, feeding Dravenmore's enemies your pack's vulnerabilities. I looked back at Caius. My family deserves justice, I said. I still believe that. I will always believe that. Yes, he said. But justice and revenge are not the same thing. I confused them for 12 years. He looked at me for a long time. I owe you a debt, he said. This bloodline owes yours a debt that can't be fully repaid. I know, but I'm going to try, he said. If you'll let me. Something in my chest. The locked room, the sealed grief, the 11-year-old girl in the dark. Something opened. Just slightly. Just enough for air to get in. Voss first, I said. And Caius Dravenmore looked at the daughter of the family his bloodline had destroyed, and said, Voss first. Chapter 11. We moved at dawn. Not literally. Not with fire, though the symmetry would have had a particular poetry to it. We moved with something more devastating than fire. We moved with proof. Caius had spent the last hours of the night making copies of every relevant document in that archive. Photographs, secure digital transfers, 2 physical copies sealed and sent to trusted external contacts outside the keep's network. By the time gray light began bleeding through the small high window of the archive room, Voss had nowhere to run that the documentation wouldn't follow him. I had spent those same hours at Caius's side. Not as Luna. Not as weapon. As partner. It was strange how naturally it happened. How our thinking aligned. Not identically. We argued 3 times about approach, and twice I told him flatly he was wrong, and once he told me the same. But in the same register. Looking at the same problem from different angles, and finding the angles complementary, rather than contradictory. I noted this with one part of my mind. The rest of my mind was occupied with the operational details of dismantling a man who had been building his position for 30 years. The council meeting was called for 9 o'clock. Ostensibly about the Velen attack. About the escalating border situation. Voss arrived precisely on time, impeccable in his elder's formal gray, radiating the satisfied composure of a man who believed himself to be the only person in the room who truly understood the situation. I watched him settle into his council seat. He looked at me once, across the table. That winter smile. I smiled back. Warm. Open. Entirely without threat. His smile thinned fractionally. Caius opened the meeting. Standard protocol. The patrol attack, the confirmed Velen authorization, the preliminary response options. Wren presented the border assessment. Lyra asked 3 precise questions about supply line protection that confirmed she was as operationally sharp as she was politically dangerous. I sat quietly, watching Voss watch me, watching him recalculate. He had expected, I realized, that his conversation with me yesterday would have triggered flight, that I would have understood the threat and run, revealing my hand, confirming his suspicion, giving him exactly what he needed to expose me to the council and cement his own position. He had not expected me to still be here, sitting at the Luna's seat. Calm. Elder Voss, Caius said. The room shifted. That particular shift, when everyone in a room realizes simultaneously that the meeting they thought they were in is not the meeting that is actually happening. I'd like your assessment of the Velen intelligence breach, Caius said. Voss spread his hands. The open gesture. A serious escalation. The border positioning suggests advanced knowledge of our patrol routes, which indicates. Yes, Caius said. Advanced knowledge of our patrol routes. He let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Routed through a channel that's been active for approximately 20 years. The temperature in the room dropped. Voss was still. Very still. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, he said. Caius placed the documentation on the table. Not dramatically. Not with anger, though I knew the anger was there, contained, operating at depth, fueling rather than leading. He placed the papers the way you place a verdict. I'm not suggesting anything, Caius said. I'm informing the council that we have documented evidence of a long-term intelligence arrangement between Elder Voss and the Velen Alpha. He looked down the table, stretching back 20 years, including the specific information transfers that preceded this week's patrol attack. A pause. An authorization correspondence regarding the Ashvale massacre. The council erupted. Not loudly. These were not people who shouted. It was an eruption of the quiet kind. The rapid exchange of controlled glances. The sudden stillness of people recalibrating everything they thought they knew. The contained panic of council members who were realizing they had been sharing a table with a traitor for decades. Voss looked at the documents. And then he looked at me. And I watched the moment he understood. Not just that he had been caught, but how. His eyes moved from the Ashvale correspondence to my face, and the winter left them entirely, replaced by something older and rawer and much more dangerous. The specific fury of a man who realizes he was outplayed by exactly the thing he tried to destroy. She is not who she claims, Voss said. His voice was still controlled, still precise. The Luna candidate. She came here under false pretenses. Her bloodline is Ashvale, Caius said. Silence. Complete and absolute. Yes, Caius said into that silence. I know who she is. He held Voss's gaze from the head of the table. I know who she came here as. And I know what she found in the archive that your predecessor believed was safely buried. A pause. Do you want to explain to this council why you had a private archive of Dravenmore's intelligence vulnerabilities stored on the 5th level? Or shall I? Voss stood, one fluid motion, and reached for something inside his jacket. He was fast, genuinely fast, for a man his age, the speed of a wolf who had never stopped training even as his public role became sedentary. His hand cleared his jacket in a fraction of a second. He never finished the motion. Because Lyra, of all people, Lyra in a gray dress today, who had not moved from her seat through any of it, put her hand on his wrist with a grip that stopped him completely. Don't, she said. One word. Colder than anything in the room. Voss looked at her. Lyra looked back with 8 years of collected knowledge in her eyes. I've been watching you for 4 years, she said. I thought you were working against Caius. Something moved across her face. I didn't realize the scale. She didn't release his wrist. Sit down. He sat. Not because Lyra was physically stronger. Because she had said it with the tone of someone who had already won. And some part of Voss recognized that. The rest of the council meeting was procedural. Pack law. Council authority. Formal detainment pending full investigation. Caius's beta, Ren, who was white-faced and clearly conducting rapid internal inventory of his own position, moved through the legal formalities with the desperate efficiency of a man demonstrating his loyalty through competence. I watched from the Luna's seat. Lyra, once Voss had been escorted from the chamber by 2 senior wolves, looked across the table at me. I looked back. She inclined her head. Fractionally. Not warmth. Not friendship. Respect. I returned it. The same measure. Later, much later, when the council had dispersed and the formal proceedings had been handed to the pack's legal structure, and the keep was running on the exhausted, adrenaline-edged energy of a place that has just survived something that was never supposed to happen. Caius found me at my window. He knocked this time. I let him in. He looked tired in a way that was different from before. Before, his tiredness had been old and chronic, the tiredness of long carrying. This was fresh. The tiredness of someone who has just set something down and doesn't quite know yet how to stand without the weight. Voss will cooperate, he said. He's calculating whether full disclosure gets him a better outcome than resistance. He'll make the rational choice. He paused. He always makes the rational choice. And the Velen Alpha? That's a longer conversation. He moved to stand beside me at the window. The eastern forest, as always, dark and patient below us. One that doesn't have to happen tonight. We stood in silence for a moment. Lyra, I said. I know. Something in his voice that might have been the beginning of tired amusement. I'll deal with that too. She's not your enemy. I know that too. He looked at me sideways. She told me once, for years ago, that someone on my council was running against me. I didn't believe her. A pause. I should have. You should have. I agreed. He laughed. A short, quiet sound. I had never heard him laugh. It changed his whole face. I looked away quickly. The bond was doing something I didn't have a name for. Not the pressing, insistent push of the early days. Something slower. Something deeper. Like water finding the lowest point of a landscape, following gravity without effort. Sarah, he said. My real name. In his voice. I had heard it from him exactly once before. In the archive, with 12 years of grief on the table between us. But that had been a recognition. A piece of a puzzle clicking into place. This was different. This was my name in the mouth of someone who had heard all of it, and was choosing to be present anyway. I know this isn't resolved, he said. My bloodline. What was done? The debt. He was looking at the forest too. I know a morning and a council meeting and one man in custody doesn't settle it. I'm not asking you to, he stopped. I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel. I know, I said. But I want you to stay. The forest was very still below us. Not as Luna Vane, he said. Not as a political arrangement or a cover identity or a weapon. He looked at me. As whoever you actually are, which I'm not sure either of us fully knows yet. I thought about the locked room behind my ribs. I thought about all the things I had kept there for 12 years because they were too dangerous to let breathe. The death weaving, I said. Yes. I could still. I know. The bond is opening, I said. I can feel it. If I let it open fully. I know, he said again. He was looking at me with gray eyes that had carried 12 years of someone else's crime and had not yet learned what it felt like to put it down. You're not afraid, I said. I'm terrified, he said. But not of the weaving. What then? He was quiet for a moment. That you'll decide the girl in the cellar deserves the ending she planned, he said. That the woman she became won't want something different. The locked room. The ash. My mother's voice ending. My father's 3 words. And underneath all of it, pressing up through 12 years of sealed grief and careful rage, something I had refused to call by its name. Something that felt, in this moment, undeniably like wanting to live. Not just survive. Live. I'm going to need time, I said. I have time, he said. I'm going to have bad days. Days where all of it comes back and you're the easy 3S target in the room. I know. You can't fix what happened. No, he said. I can't. But you can be part of what comes after. The bond settled. Like something finally finding its ground. I didn't reach for him. He didn't reach for me. But our shoulders were touching, in the window of the Luna's quarters, looking out at the eastern forest where my family's ashes were. And for the first time in 12 years, the dark didn't feel like it was only full of what I had lost. Chapter 12. 6 weeks later, I stood in the eastern forest. Kaya stood beside me. We had not talked much on the drive out. Some things don't need words. Some things, the important ones, the ones that cost something, exist in silence better than in speech. The clearing was smaller than I had imagined. I had built it enormous in my memory. The way trauma expands the geography of the places where it happened, making them mythological rather than physical. But it was just a clearing. Trees grown tall in the years since. New undergrowth covering the old foundation lines. In another 20 years, you would walk through here and never know there had been something worth loving, where now there was only forest. But I knew. I stood in the approximate center of where our house had been, felt the ground under my feet, breathed the air. My mother had loved the smell of this forest in the morning. She used to say it smelled like beginning again. I had never understood that as a child. It had just smelled like forest to me. It smelled like beginning again now. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the gray-bound Ashvale volume. I had debated what to do with it for weeks. It was evidence of the massacre, of Voss's involvement, of the betrothal proposal that had cost my family their lives. The formal investigation had copies of everything relevant. What remained was this, the original, the last Ashvale document in existence. I held it for a moment. What do you want to do with it? Caius asked. I had known he would ask exactly that. Not, what should we do? Not, maybe you should keep it. Not any of the 100 ways people try to nudge you toward the conclusion they've already reached. Just, what do you want? I knelt down, pressed my hand flat against the earth of the clearing, felt the cold, warm, specific texture of soil that has been in one place for a long time, that knows itself thoroughly. My name is Sarah Ashvale, I said. To the clearing, to the ash, to whatever remained here of the 18 people I had shared blood with. I'm the last one. I know that now. I've known it for a long time. My voice was steady, not controlled, steady. The difference between forcing a river and being a river. I came here to take back what was owed. I think I have. Not the way I planned. Not the ending I built. I paused. But Voss will face justice. The truth is on record. Your name, our name, is spoken now. Not erased. The trees were still. I'm going to keep living, I said. I'm going to be loud about who I am. I'm going to rebuild what can be rebuilt and carry what can't be fixed, and I'm going to do it without apology. I pressed my hand harder against the earth. That's the ending I'm choosing. I'm choosing it for both of us. I stood. I looked at Caius. He was watching me with those gray eyes. Still carrying something, they would always carry something. That was part of who he was, but lighter than I had ever seen them. Like a room after the windows have been opened. Voss's formal hearing is next week, he said. I'll be there. The Velen negotiation starts the week after. I'll be there for that too. And the pack, he said. They know who you are now. Most of them are adjusting. I know. I had walked the keep corridors for 6 weeks as Sarah Ashvale, and it was strange and hard, and sometimes the way people looked at me felt like a wound reopened. But it was real. It was true. They'll adjust. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you know the bonding rite we performed, the intense ceremony, it doesn't bind anything formally until the bond opens fully, I said. Yes. I know. So technically you're not. I know. He stopped. I looked at him. I said I needed time. I said. I didn't say I needed forever. Something in his face changed. That shift I had spent weeks learning to read. The one that was not quite amusement, and not quite relief, and not quite longing. All three. All at once. Specific as a signature. All right, he said. All right, I said. I took his hand. Not for the bond. Not for strategy. Not for any reason that had a calculation behind it. Just because the morning light was coming through the trees and the forest smelled like beginning again, and I was the last Ashvale standing in the earth of her family's home, and I was alive. Genuinely, completely, fully alive. And I did not want to be holding that alone. His hand closed around mine. Warm. Steady. The same as the archive. The same as the training yard. And completely different from both. We stood in the clearing for a long time. The trees moved in the wind. The light shifted. Somewhere in the branches above us, something small and unnamed sang its uncomplicated song to the morning. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I had expected that. Had braced for the collapse of 12 years of contained grief. The flood that would come when I finally let the walls down. Instead, there was something quieter. Something that felt like the tide going out. Not loss. Release. The difference between an ending and a completion. My family was gone. That was a fact. It would always be a fact. No justice, no reclaimed name, no man with gray eyes and careful hands would change the particular shape of that. But they were not forgotten. They were not unnamed. They were ash in the soil of their own land. And their last daughter was standing in their clearing with her head up and her name in her mouth, and her hand in the hand of someone who was trying. Genuinely, imperfectly, with full knowledge of the debt he owed. To be worthy of what came next. It wasn't everything I had lost. It was something real. And something real, I was learning, was more than I had allowed myself to want for a very long time. I lifted my face to the morning. Breathed in. Forest. Pine. Cold air. Beginning.